Welcome to the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It is the 23rd day of August. We are past the half point of the third quarter, the first month of the third quarter here. First month, third quarter, halfway done. Coming out of the summertime, we just had the Democratic National Convention conclude last night with Kamala Harris accepting her party's nomination now for President of the United States. Huge, historically in this country to see the actual candidate for president step down because of age and other factors. And as much as anything, the fact that he wasn't winning and didn't really seem to have a prayer, Democrats uncharacteristically figured that out and put themselves in a better position. You know, Will Rogers said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." Well, Will Rogers might be disappointed because they seem kind of organized here lately. Good for you, Democrats. And yet it's a neck and neck race with Donald Trump, with Kamala Harris moving ahead in the polls. You would expect that really with a new announcement. A lot of enthusiasm in the convention. What have you got 30 days from now? Farr says it's going to be neck and neck. We're going to talk to two political experts this morning, folks. We've got Dan Mahaffee, of course, joining us. And then we've got Matt Leffingwell coming back for segment 3, Washington lobbyist and insider, a different perspective. Matt has to make money on what happens in Washington and making introductions and policy changes. So he follows it very, very closely. Kenny Polcari joins us for our first segment, and Kenny and I have to pay attention to how all of these policies are going to affect a market trading at all-time highs. Equity prices are near all-time highs. Earnings, 88% of companies basically matched or beat their earnings estimates in the second quarter. All of those earnings pretty much are out by now. Quarter that ended in June. We've heard about most all of them, including the retailers. Some good, some bad, but none particularly awful, which is good. So with earnings, I'm going to still say limping along. They don't feel fabulous. Earnings limping along. Stock prices high. Multiple on the S&P 500 close to 22 times. This is not a cheap market. Interest rates have come below 4% again. Mortgage applications picking up a little bit. Home sales picking up a little bit, but not enough. What really picked up? Inventories up 20% year over year. Whoa, lots for sale, folks, lots for sale. Who's buying? And are you sitting there waiting for interest rates to get cut 2 or 3 more times? Are you sitting there saying, I can get a mortgage that's at least 3/4 of a point cheaper, probably by January or February, than if I get one today? And are you therefore sitting on your hands? Is that slowing things down? The anticipation. We always say people want to know not only what is happening to interest rates or inflation or any of these economic data, but what people expect will happen. What people expect will happen is hugely important. And folks expect these rates to come down, and they don't want to buy that money today. Kenny Polcari, good morning. You've listened to me rant. What are you thinking as we look at this Friday coming into a weekend? Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going to go at it. You see what's happening on Wall Street? And Fed Chairman Jerome Powell speaks at 10 o'clock this morning. What's he going to say? What are you going to do? And what should Fred and Ethel think about all that's going on?
So, good morning, Mike. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. So look, here's the deal. Jay Powell's speech this morning at 10 o'clock, then followed by the way, a host of other central bankers from around the world going to be talking about policy and their country and rates and all that stuff. So it's going to be a very interesting day, but certainly here, all eyes are focused on what Jay Powell's going to say. And quite honestly, I think he's going to remain characteristically the way he is. He's going to sit on the fence. He's going to be very methodical. He's not going to sit there. If anyone expects him to sit there and say, yep, we're cutting rates by 25 basis points in September 16th and then again in November and again in December, he's not going to say that. Nor is he going to say they're cutting rates by 50 basis points. He's going to remain himself. He's going to talk about the data. He's going to talk about how it's getting ready to be cut. He's going to talk about the path of rates is lower. And I think he's going to leave it open. The market already expects a 25% basis point cut. I think it's an 80% chance of they're pricing it in now of a 25 basis point cut. I think that's the right thing to do. I actually think we're going to get 325 cuts this year, September, November, and December. I think that's right. I don't think it should be more. I don't think it should be necessarily less. And I think that's exactly what the market's going to hear. And I don't think then the market's going to be surprised. That's what it has priced in. Remember, if he announces a 50 basis point cut in September, that could send two messages. It could send one that, we're way behind the eight ball and, there's trouble ahead and we need to get way out in front, which would be negative. Or he could just say, listen, we've been slow off the start. The economy's fine. Inflation's coming down. We can handle this, and try to paint it as a positive picture. I think cutting 50 is going to send a negative picture. So that's why I think he's going to stay with 25. And I think that's okay. And I think the market expects it. And then I think you're going to see the market back off, right? I do think through October, we're going to see the market trend lower. Now, next week, don't forget, we're going to get NVIDIA earnings. All excited about NVIDIA. And I'm sure they're going to blow the roof off the house. And I'm sure they're going to talk all about, AI and how everyone's buying it. We already know that. That's not new information. And I don't think that's going to save the market from a seasonally weak time of year that we're in, which doesn't mean that Fred and Ethel need to get nervous or panicky. They just need to understand that this is a time of the year and they should be able to take opportunity. And their advisor should also be looking for those opportunities that this pullback is going to create.
That's right. Well, the old line on Wall Street is October is the cruelest month for stocks, and the other months are November, December, January, February. it's not a bad line. I mean, but you see the stock market going up and still pushing these new all-time highs. It's due for a breather. And coming into the election and everything else, first year of an election cycle is always tough, starting in January. That's the most difficult one. We'll watch all of this. But you remember that line from the poem, whether it's evident to you or not, the universe is probably unfolding as it should. So as much as we grind about all of these minutiae that are affecting the economy and what we might expect next, universe is probably unfolding as it should. And if you own really good companies for the long term, you're going to do well as an investor. That's always been Farr's story. That's always been Polcari's story. It's as important now, I think, to ignore the yelling and the screaming in the fish market and pay attention to the price of fish. Are these prices high? Are these prices low? Interest rates high, interest rates low. Give me the big view, Kenny. Interest rates at these levels in your lifetime, in my lifetime, in our careers are still stupid low. You shouldn't make money with this kind of cheap money.
They're historically normal, right? Between 4 and 6% is really historically normal. It's when they held them at zero for 15 years that was historically not normal. Yet that whole generation of people that came into the business at that time or came into their life at that time, that's where the problem is, because that's all they were used to. And now they think this is crazy, which is why they're all screaming and yelling for lower rates. I actually think, I think if they cut by a half a percent, total, three quarters okay, but I don't think they should be cutting, 2 percentage points over the course of the next year and take rates back down to 3%. I don't think that's proper at all. I think that once again puts us out balance, right? It's not in balance. I think rates have to be at a place where the market can function, people have opportunities, businesses can function, and life goes on. And I think that's just about where we are. Give a 0.5% either way is not going to make it a break or didn't make it right one way or the other.
Right. I mean, the economy got too hot because they shoved too much money in it too fast and left it there too long. It got too hot. We got inflation that was killing people. So the Fed jerked rates higher and the economy is slowing down, and we're seeing those slowdowns across. Will it stall? Will it not stall? Soft landing, not soft landing? High, I think odds of a soft landing are increasing. Soft landing still means lower. You've still got to land. You hope not to crash, but picture the plane landing. It's going to go down, and maybe you're not going to have your teeth shaken out of your head when the damn thing hits the runway. That's always pleasant. But, so that's what's happening. It's still going down, and that's what Kenny's talking about as you come into the fall here. I thought it was kind of a fun exercise. Years and years ago, I asked readers of the Farr View to imagine if they were the chairman of the Federal Reserve. If you were chairman of the Federal Reserve and you were the one who had to go and talk today at 10 o'clock in the morning, knowing that markets around the world are looking at your facial expressions, that they've got computers listening to your voice patterns to detect how much tension is there, how much tension's not there. Can the computers read something into what you're doing? Can you imagine if Jay Powell were up on the screen and had a bout of stomach distress, started getting stomach cramps in the middle of his interview and made a grimace on his face and had to do that, quick two-step trot off the stage going, "Excuse me a minute, I gotta go." Markets around the world would crash. I mean, the world would come to an end. It would be awful. The bond market would go nuts. Billions of dollars would start trading, all because this guy had, a little bad sushi the night before. So the responsibility is enormous, and the delicacy, he can't say, "I think things are great. I think things are proceeding along a positive course at a modest pace," and blah, blah, blah. He's got to parse his words. I've told everybody, I've known Jay Powell for a long time. He will absolutely be lawyerly, deliberate, and he will do what he says he's going to do, and don't expect him to stray from that script. He hasn't done it once. He hasn't strayed from the script once since he's been chairman, as much as markets have been begging. And by the way, when the Fed starts cutting, it's not because things are great. Kenny, give us a final word and tell Fred and Ethel what to think, and tell us if you're making any changes in your portfolio or think anybody should.
I am the moment not making any changes in the portfolio, but nor am I chasing stocks up here at these levels, right? Clients that I have are invested, so they're participating. They've also got some cash on the side that's earning 5% at the moment in a government money market fund, waiting for that next opportunity, which we think is going to come to what you and I discussed probably sometime in October, and then we'll start to proceed. But look, you're going to have to pay attention to, obviously, what's going on in the presidential election, because that will cause some short-term chaos in the markets. And sometimes in that chaos, it will also present opportunity if we see stocks get dislocated for no other reason than there's anxiety and nervousness. Don't build a portfolio around a presidential election. Not at all. You might tweak it around the edges once you realize who's coming in and what the policies may be. But I wouldn't look to change my portfolio ahead of the November 5th election, or even ahead of really the first 100 days of their presidency, to kind of see where it falls and where it lays out. One way or the other, you have to stay as a long-term investor. You have to know what you own. You're going to own the biggest names in the sectors you like, and not worry about it, and trust your advisor.
Let me tell you one quick addendum too. The consensus gets it wrong. CNBC had me on all night long when Donald Trump was elected president. They had me on at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3 a.m. What do you think? The futures are down 900, Mr. Farr. The futures are down 900. Trump just got elected. The market's going to crash and burn and everything's awful. By the time they opened, futures were up and they went nuts. People get nervous, and going into it, people were calling me, and clients were calling saying, "How do I hedge this election? What if Donald Trump gets elected? It's going to be awful." It wasn't awful. It wasn't awful. I don't care what your political views are when it comes to the stock market. Did you make money? Did it go up? So if you're an investor, you set your political hat aside and said, "I like it to go up." Investors like markets to go up. Did they go up over those 4 years? Yes. Did they go through COVID, and did they go through a serious bear market collapse? Yes. But basically, the election effect that was expected was not the one that was gotten, and that always happens. That always happens.
Always the way it is. Which is why you really have to take a step back and not become emotional. To your point, no matter what your political affiliation is, you cannot let that cloud you when it comes to investing.
No question. The words to live by. Kenny Polcari is CEO of Case Capital Advisors. He is the chief market strategist for Slate Stone Wealth, and my great friend, much older friend, for many years. Thanks, Kenny. We're going to be right back with Mahaffee. Stay with us.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. The sound of surf guitar must mean it's time for Dan Mahaffee. This week's special convention segment also includes Matt Leffingwell. Now, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. We've had our both debates from the Democrats and the Republicans. The conventions are over, and we're something like 74 days from the presidential election. I think that's the number, 74, 75, somewhere in there. That's about it. It was both uplifting. Joining me now, Dan Mahaffee, Vice Chairman of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, a fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, a Washington, D.C. think tank, and the senior political analyst on the FarrCast, coming to the end of season 7 now. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you. Good to be talking with you again.
Yes, sir. Give me your thoughts about the convention that ended last night and Vice President Harris's acceptance speech. Go ahead and score it. Where are we? And, I guess the pablum is that we expect she's going to get a surge in the polls coming into the weekend. And then what?
Michael, I think, look, you saw a solidly delivered speech, a convention where I think we can say no unforced errors. The stories about what we might see in Chicago or the worst case scenarios did not come to pass. I think the city acquitted itself quite well, although I'm a little biased, and we even had fantastic weather here for the delegates. That said, though, the two conventions, and I'm not going to rewatch them because I'm not a masochist, nor does the FarrCast pay me enough to do that. But what you see there is,
we like you too much, Dan, to ask you to watch those two conventions again. God help
I'm grading on a curve here because I think each convention did well, reflecting that campaign strategy and perhaps the snapshot in time of a rather remarkable campaign. The Trump convention in Milwaukee did an excellent job when it was a time and looked like a race where it was going to be very much a pump up the base kind of election, a race where the Trump team looked like they had the clear advantage, and it was really going to come down to really driving out the voters that they thought they could get to the polls, bring them out in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, keep Arizona and Georgia on side and not even have to care about North Carolina. And look, they were even thinking, we remember at the time, that Virginia could be competitive, or New Mexico, even Minnesota. For the Harris convention, I think a very different message, and one equally strongly delivered. I saw the final night as a very centrist convention. I saw Republican congressmen speaking. I saw, the panoply. It was the not Hollywood Squares, but certainly speed dating the possible VP candidates. We had them all come by before Harris finally spoke. I think Walz did a good job the previous night, of course, but Harris's speech was largely centrist. The night programming was focused on national security, school safety, and those are the kind of bread and butter issues. And I think finally you throw in abortion rights, going to be a major issue for motivating Democrats. We heard plenty of that. And I think this focused on where they see the mainline suburbs of Philly, Cobb County in Georgia, the growing suburbs of Scottsdale, those places where they think they're going to win this race.
Okay, so if we're just going to look at the two conventions, who won the convention battle? You give who did a better job with their convention, Republicans or Democrats this year?
I have to say right now, Harris by a nose, and simply just because of the momentum I think she's had coming into it. and a Democratic Party that has remarkably united and found energy. If you look at the polling, as we have, not only has she done well among independents and women, of course, important, but you've seen the return of young people, Black and Hispanic voters coming back to the column. Yeah, I know this sounds trite, but I think it was a challenge was when it was a Biden-Trump election, both sides, you were voting, and for the Biden voter, it was often a I'm voting for Biden, but ... And that was sort of the momentum going in. That cloud is lifted now, and I think Democrats tried to put the yes but label back onto the Trump Vance vote.
I think that the Republicans probably won the show, is what it felt like. I mean, in terms of their convention, it was a high energy. It was a big party. It was, I don't know. I just thought that they won
look, the Republicans, certainly the stagecraft was excellent. I think the show they put on, the way it was scripted and choreographed, and I think in that sense, both sides knew how to appeal to their voters. The Democrats too, with the scheduling. I love my Democratic friends, but it was running on Democrat Standard Time. All those things
What's Democrat Standard Time, please?
Usually about 45-minute hour different, behind 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
Look, all those things I think were, in the sense of true and reflect, though, at the end of the day, these are political pep rallies. Sticking to our analogy of this as a 3-act play, it's a lovely scene to end this second act as we go on to the third act, the real race.
Okay. I thought the enthusiasm last night, and I thought that casting Vice President Harris as something more of a moderate, a little more centrist. They didn't have her out there on the far left in her remarks. Now, when I went and attended the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, I took a theology class. I love taking theology classes. And this one was called Judaism, Christianity, the Old South, and Other Myths. Now think about that for a second. Judaism, Christianity, the Old South, and Other Myths. And it analyzed every religion, of course, as a myth, as a mythology. And I remember one young woman from, I think, Demopolis, Alabama, who was there in her sundress. I even think it was a white sundress, had the big bow in her hair because this was the early 80s, and that's what one did. And she was so thoroughly offended that this PhD professor, who was also ordained, Jerry Smith, I'm pretty sure he was ordained. Anyway, still down there, wonderful guy, suggested that Christianity could be a myth. Oh, that was, you couldn't suggest. She was truly offended. It was fine if you wanted to call Judaism a myth as far as she was concerned, but not Christianity, for God's sakes. I mean, we're in the Bible Belt. You can't do that. But here's my point. I really do have one, ladies and gentlemen. The Old South. When he talked about the Old South, he described the Old South as a religion, as a myth. It was a land of cavaliers and cotton fields, of knights and their ladies fair. Look for it only in history books, because it's a land that is gone with the wind. And that is the preamble to Gone with the Wind that scrolls across your screen when you watch that marvelous movie. And his point was, it never existed. The Old South of plantations and singing happy slaves and all of that other ball gown, hoop dress nonsense never existed, but maybe for a very, very few. The majority of Southerners were dirt poor, and they did not own slaves, and they did not sing happy songs. They were dirt farmers, and if you've ever been to Georgia and seen the red clay down there, you were not a happy farmer in Georgia, and you were really happy that perhaps cotton on a really good day could take root in that clay. So I want to bring this full rack round. I think we are really getting into conventions and a race between, indeed, the real Donald Trump, which is marvelously his handle, the real Donald Trump, against the mythological Kamala Harris. We are seeing a Kamala Harris not described ever by Kamala Harris. This is script. This is teleprompter Kamala Harris. These are the issues. These are her viewpoints. I remember the great Groucho Marx line where he said, listen, these are my beliefs. These are the things I stand for. This is what I believe in. These are my principles. And if you don't like them, I've got others. He'd have been a great politician. When do we see the real Kamala Harris? And can this race between the mythological teleprompter Kamala Harris beat the real Donald Trump? I think there's a chance. I'd never take her off a teleprompter, and I'd get him on teleprompter as fast as I could, and I don't think you can.
No, I think that's the paradox that'll define this third act is this myth, as you put it, being built, or is it a triangulation of politics? These campaigns are won by good politicians, not principled legislators. So that'll be the question of temperament and personality, though, comes to the fore, and I think that's what they played into the convention. And in retail politics, it does come down to, in many instances, even though I don't think any of these are drinkers, that proverbial which candidate do you want to have a beer with? So those are the ways the voter thinks about it and what it will come down to. And I think you're right that there's a good chance this continues, but again, an actual debate will be the key factor. And if we get that together, look, we have the Waltz-Vance debate scheduled, and I think we're going to get, unless there's a move elsewhere, the Harris Trump debate that comes down. Will that be as striking a turning point as we saw with the first debate, the Biden-Trump debate, or will that be an opportunity where, as you say, Trump is able to look to pin her down on some of these policy issues and really see if they are that out of step with the American electorate?
What I know, from debating people over the years, is that you never go where your opponent wants to take you. Right? I mean, that's like fundamental. You never go down the line that the opponent wants to take you. You stick with your own line of reason and thought and expression and argument. And the Republicans are wailing into the night that they can't get Vice President Harris an open mic for a real press conference to answer hard questions. If I'm managing that campaign, that will not happen. If Joe Biden could win from her basement, this is the most high-profile basement we've ever had. Dan, I'm going to move on to Leffingwell, but because this has been fascinating, but he brings another perspective here. Give us your final word about where you think we are now. At what point will they ever let Kamala Harris out of the basement? And if you had to make the call now, election now, who wins?
Election now, I see it as a close Harris victory, the way the momentum has changed. And
How about November? 74 days.
In 74 days, I still see this as a narrow Trump victory. That's the underlying policy debate is still in his favor. Now, the temperament debate is going to come down to this. Temperament debate comes down to the debate. I think it will be largely a temperament debate, given how much the first part with Biden was about his capability, his age, and inability on that podium. I don't think the voters are as worried about the policy factors as much and want to just see how each handles it. I don't think the Harris campaign, as you say, would be malpractice for them to get her off teleprompter. But as of right now, everyone who's raised that she hasn't had an interview yet, they all seem to be voting for Trump already. It's not really resonating among that swing voter yet. But again, in that next 74 days, they're going to want to hear more from her.
I think this debate will be the most fun must-watch TV for me coming up. Now, maybe that means I'm a masochist, but It will be real. It's fascinating to see if President Trump will stay somewhat enough on script and not be baited into losing it by Vice President Harris. And when you watch that debate, I would suggest that that's what you have to think. Picture those two people, either one of them, on the other side of a desk from Putin or Xi Jinping or Bibi Netanyahu, and see who you think is more likely to hand the other guy his lunch. That's what you need as president. Who's going to represent us? And I think we get to see a lot there. It's going to be fascinating. Dan Mahaffee from the Dr. Scholl Foundation, senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Thank you so much, Dan. We'll see you next week, of course.
Thank you, Michael.
Now, our great friend, Matt Leffingwell, with the DC Insiders. You know, Mahaffee has moved to Chicago. He still talks to all these DC people, and he was the think tank guy. Leffingwell, on the other hand, is the guy who actually has to make a living with all of these relationships. And no matter who wins this election, he's still got to get in there and fight for his clients and figure out how all these big companies have to position themselves with whatever likely outcome, good or bad, is going to happen. Hey, Matt Leffingwell, welcome back to the FarrCast.
It's great to be here, Michael. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. You heard Mahaffee. What do you think?
I tend to agree with him. I think that there's a lot of momentum in the Democrats.
Really? Wait, really? You agree with Mahaffee? Wow.
I do. I think I think a campaign from this point forward after post conventions, it's going to be a series of pendulum swings. And while the momentum's with the Harris campaign at the moment, I think there'll be multiple swings in either direction before November. But, I think the larger policy ideas that the Harris campaign is setting out just won't, there's no appetite to actually be able to achieve them with the sour, I think the sour environment on spending overall, post COVID. I don't think her vision and what her big policy priorities are actually going to be able to be funded in the current climate in Congress.
Okay. You listen to my the real Donald Trump versus the Kamala Harris myth. How do you like my characterization, and how does that play out?
Oh, I think you're 100% right. The one thing I would add to what you said is that I do think that the Trump campaign was pretty taken aback or shocked or caught flat-footed with the rapid shift in momentum. I mean, I think the convention post shooting for the Republicans felt very much like this was a locked in victory for Trump, and now it's a completely different environment a month later.
What are you telling clients who need to come and bring their issues to Capitol Hill, and what are you telling them they should be doing now? What should they be worried about? Do you when you're a lobbyist in Washington, do you have to predict this outcome and give some guidance, or do you say nobody knows, it's a jump ball, if it goes this way, if it goes that way, here's what we're going to have to do? How do you do that?
Well, I think the safest thing is plan for both scenarios, and that is constantly tracking who the individuals are behind the scenes going into the transition teams, and who could potentially go into a Trump or Harris administration, because that will largely define how their issues are dealt with throughout the government. Whether it's rulemaking or
we've heard that your name has been bandied about for Secretary of State. Would you be willing to serve if indeed you were nominated? That's really what we need to know.
I don't think I need anybody going through my trash cans for a Senate confirmation process,
and nobody that hasn't already, anyway. All right. Well, he lives in a bit of a dicey neighborhood, folks. It's not out of the question on any average day, frankly.
Right.
Okay, if you can't tell, folks, that Matt Leffingwell and I are old friends, so I have a little more.
Look, yes, we are old friends, but to answer your question, I mean, a lot of what we're doing with clients right now is tracking the individuals behind the scenes. Like, for example, we have one client who's very concerned about a number of Harris individuals from the AG's office going into a transition team and helping to define her policy visions that way. because there was a very different Kamala Harris in California than there was, what was exhibited last night on the convention floor, right? So it's there's a lot of spitballing here, but I do think there are tea leaves there to indicate what either administration would potentially look like.
She seems to have shifted last night to a more centrist view. The teleprompter Harris is very different from the Today Show Harris, if you will. Will she actually govern that way? Mahaffee said something off screen before we got on that I like. They said a lot of people seem to agree with a lot of the Trump agenda items, but they'd prefer Harris to administer those items. They just don't want to deal with Donald Trump's administration, even though they kind of like some of his policies. Does that resonate? And will they get the centrist Kamala Harris, or are they going to get the lefty Kamala Harris they've seen so much of?
Well,
there isn't any right-wing Kamala Harris that anybody's ever seen, to my knowledge.
Well, look, I think the difference between a Harris administration and a Trump administration is that a Trump administration would be a second term and a Harris administration would be a first term with, presumably the goal of getting reelected. So I do think you're going to see a much more centrist first term Kamala Harris if she were to be elected, whereas I think, the Trump campaign will have a very different posture.
We saw, I think shockingly, if you can remember back to when you were in grade school and George W. Bush was president of the United States, and you might not have even been in grade school. I thought I was kidding, actually, but now I remember how long ago
I worked
it was.
in the Bush-Cheney campaign.
But you were 12. You were one of those strange 12-year-olds who decided that I'm gonna get involved in politics. Great. So let's harken back to 2000, 24 years ago.
Yep.
When George W. Bush came into office, he was a centrist Republican, really middle of the road. He brought in both camps, and 9/11 happened, and he swung hard right. Was my experience. I don't know if others will agree or disagree, but that was my experience with President Bush. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's a potential, at least for either candidate who become president?
100%. I totally agree. I mean, to your point, I mean, Bush came in with very much a domestic focused agenda. He was talking about education and suburban issues, I think, and coming in with it through the lens of his compassionate conservatism. And I would actually say about Bush, even after 9/11, he tried to return to this compassionate conservatism, even in his foreign policy, via taking on the HIV epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. There were and through food aid reform. I mean, the president really did try to carry out that theme throughout his 2 terms in office, in spite of his, I think what, has defined his legacy being Iraq and Afghanistan. So I don't, look, anything, he's a great example, though, how anything can happen and turn, upend a vision and an agenda. So this is definitely an interesting time. So there's a lot of potential for international volatility that can upend anybody's domestic vision.
Sometimes humor is funny because you just say out loud what everybody has in the back of their mind is true, and they kind of shock and laugh. And one of my friends who was very close with the Bush family said President Bush 43 came into office governing like his father and left governing like his mother. and if you knew President and Mrs. Bush Sr., I'm telling you, folks, that's funny. That's funny because President Bush Sr. was one of the loveliest men I ever had the opportunity to know. And Mrs. Bush, while absolutely lovely, anybody who ever dealt with Mrs. Barbara Bush would not mess with her. No, her kids wouldn't mess with her. I mean, you could push dad, but nobody pushed mom. Okay. Matt, I'm going to finish up here very quickly, if you don't mind. I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. Republican Republican convention better than the Democratic convention, or vice versa? What do you think?
I think it's vice versa. I think also it's people. I thought there were a couple strange, strange images coming out of the Republican convention, such as people wearing bandages over the side of their left face and other bizarre things. So this was a much more palatable convention to watch overall versus the Republican convention for me personally. And I thought it went smoothly. I mean, I know Dan alluded to the delays, but that's I think everybody's pretty accustomed to the Democrats not running on time.
Okay. Well, I mean, not running on time. How long did President Trump's speech take at the convention? And it got weird there at the end. I'm not sure where he was going.
I admittedly did not. I admittedly just read the reviews the next morning.
Okay. It got weird. Election today versus election today versus election in 74 days.
I still think that Trump would win both. I really do. I mean, I think yes, there is a lot of momentum for Harris at the moment, but I do think Trump overall is still a much more palatable.
What makes you change your mind? What makes you change your mind, Matt?
If he continues to behave as though he is shocked and taken aback by this sudden shift in momentum for the Democrats, he's got to be able to define Harris. He spent the last 3.5 years defining his next campaign against Joe Biden, and he's got to pivot. So if he's not able to pivot well, then I do think there's going to be some challenges for him.
Matt Leffingwell is a partner at the Tiber Creek Group. And one of those Washington guys, if you really want to know what's going on. And he has secrets, too, about a lot of these folks in this administration on Capitol Hill. He's not going to tell us on the air. He has told me privately and gives you really, really good insights.
You have to get the premium membership to hear all those, right?
It's the premium. Yes, it's called Don't Give It Away when I got people pay me for it. It's a good... That'll help you get around Washington for years if you remember that one rule. The dog thing, and don't give it away if you get paid for it.
Right.
All right, folks, that's another FarrCast as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Thanks to Kenny Polcari, Dan Mahaffee, and Matthew Leffingwell, all my friends coming on to share their expertise and insights so we better understand what's going on in the world, in the economy, and certainly with our government. Please join us again next week. For everybody at Hightower, for my producer, Harry Jennings, Farr Miller in Washington, thanks for listening. Share us on social media. I'll be back next week. Have a great weekend. I'm Michael Farr.
That's it for this week's episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to our guests, Kenny Polcari, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Matt Leffingwell. We'll be back with you next week with more from Wall Street, Washington, and the world, here on the FarrCast. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.